I'd like to start by having you reflect back to the pandemic for a moment. During that time, there was a fitness equipment manufacturer that looked unstoppable. I mean, their commercials were everywhere. Demand was exploding, inventory backlogs, and every traditional indicator was pointing in the same direction. Build more, lock in supply, expand capacity. And the leadership team did exactly that. They invested heavily in new manufacturing capability, inventory, and improved logistics, all with the belief that the growth that they were seeing would indeed continue. Now, you all know exactly what happened next. The world reopened, and all of a sudden demand dropped much faster than they expected. Within a year, they had to halt production, shutter assets. They were sitting on a mountain of inventory, and they took some heavy losses. Now, here's why that story is so relevant today. It's because the machine learning algorithms that the company was using actually predicted that demand was cooling. The data was there, but the leadership team didn't trust it. Instead, they relied upon their own experience and judgment and overrode the AI. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't that what leaders are supposed to do? Exercise experience and judgment and make the tough calls. And sometimes you might be right, because we've seen examples where AI got it badly wrong, where AI, leaders put their recommendations to work and invested tens of millions of dollars on it, only to see models collapse in the face of very changing conditions and then taking huge losses on the back end. But here's the thing. Both in the cases where AI got it right and in the cases where AI got it wrong, the companies that failed had something in common. They didn't have a clear process for how to make the call. No decision criteria to know when to trust the model judgment and when to override it. No mechanism to capture the learning so that the next decision could be better. It was all reactionary, all ad hoc, and invisible until the results hit the P&L. Now, that's not an AI problem. It's not even a leadership problem. It's a decision governance problem, and it's only getting worse because AI is not just in forecasting. It's in your pricing process and in demand forecasting, production planning, workforce planning, inventory management, so many different things. AI is making more recommendations than ever, faster than ever, and with a greater reliance from the people in your organization. And still, most organizations haven't defined what that process needs to look like. How do they make decisions with AI involved in the mix? So I want you to think about this for a moment. Just reflect on this. If you had to look across your entire organization and pick all the points where AI is influencing decisions in your organization, could you do it? Are you clear on where you need to have a human in the loop for every major decision process in your organization that AI is influencing? And more importantly, are you clear on the criteria that they need to use to interrogate AI recommendations when they arrive? So if you've got any uncertainty about any of those questions, that's the CFO's blind spot, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Because the reality is that this is a challenging area that we all need to get our arms around. Now, let me give you a preview for where we're headed over the next 30 minutes or so, because I do want you to leave with 3 primary takeaways from today's discussion. And the first is, I want you to have a fuller understanding of AI decision risk in your organization. Why it's so important, why it's so impactful, and why it's something that you need to address right now. The second thing is, I want you to have clarity on the 3 gaps that you need to address if you want to get your arms around AI decision governance in your organization. I'm talking about the 3 gaps that sit principally between AI recommendations and executive level accountability, the things that you need to be focused on the most. And then third, I want you to walk away with clarity around the difference between AI tools governance and AI decision governance. Those 2 things are very different. They're related, but very different. And the latter is where your material financial exposure truly lies. So that's the heart of what I want to go through today. But there is a bonus, because if you stick around to the end, I've got a discussion guide that I want to share with you that I can put in your hands that you can take back to your organization so you can dive into where you might have some exposure in your organization and where you need to prioritize. So with that, let's dive into it. And I want to start by talking about where we are in this moment with AI. And I know we've had a lot of conversation about it already. We see AI everywhere in a whole bunch of different operational as well as financial processes. And, so we've touched on all of these things over the course of the last couple of days, from pricing to forecasting to inventory management, capital management, and yes, also even on financial reporting. So some recent data from Workiva on finance professionals, and shout out to Chelsea Hall from Workiva. She had some great information that she shared in yesterday's session. But 65% of finance professionals use AI in at least one component of quarterly and annual disclosure reporting, and about 46% of folks use that extensively in disclosure reporting. That's a very big number. And I want to take a step back for a moment too, because there are a whole bunch of surveys out there about AI usage, and they generally tend to underreport what people are doing. Because oftentimes when you see survey results, they're talking about deployed AI, those solutions that organizations have intentionally put across their organization. But there's also embedded AI. You think about AI that's now being incorporated into the code in SAP and Oracle and Salesforce and Workday and so many other tools that are out there. There's a tremendous amount of embedded AI, and it's only growing more and more each day. And on top of that, you have off-the-books AI. AI that employees are running on their personal devices or with their personal web accounts with company information. That's a huge problem. And I found this stat interesting as well from Aranda Security, that almost 6 in 10 employees acknowledge uploading sensitive company information to personal LLMs. That is a huge number, and you see this same statistic in several other studies. Usage is very, very high on off-the-books AI. And so the risk is high for organizations when you think about that. And when you look at what that translates into how companies are responding, you see it in the numbers. 7 in 10 Fortune 500 companies now report AI as a material financial risk for their organization. That is a huge stat right there. Boards are also starting to notice. So about 40% of corporate boards have now formally assigned AI oversight to one or more committees for governance, and primarily it's the audit committee. And they're doing that because when you think about the risk on AI, it's not just how they're influencing decisions, it's not just company widespread use by company employees, but also there are tremendous financial implications for that. AI litigation doubled in 2025 versus 2024. You also have new regulations coming into play. For those of you not familiar with the EU AI Act, that applies to any organization that's selling goods or services into Europe or who has employees in Europe. That probably includes a good swath of the people in the room. But the penalties for governance failures can be as high as 35 million or 7% of global revenues. I mean, that is significant when you start thinking about the magnitude of the numbers. So summing all that up, AI is in your processes, whether you intentionally put it there or not. The risk continues to escalate. Certainly your board is beginning to notice, investors and regulators are noticing, and the consequences are more than just theoretical. They're actually tangible, financial, and very real. So when you think about that risk, what are most organizations doing about it right now? Well, frankly, they're writing policies about what type of tools employees can access, how do they control information, what clauses to be included in vendor agreements. And those things are very necessary, don't get me wrong. But that's AI tools governance. That's speaking to the questions of, who can access it, and can we operate the environment safely, and can we control our information? It doesn't get to the point of How is AI influencing key decisions in our organization that are going to touch our financial processes ultimately? AI decision governance. And that difference is very tangible because I've had the opportunity to work with organizations of all sizes across a wide variety of industries, again, from small businesses to enterprise level organizations. And one thing that's very clear to me in this moment is most organizations have figured out how to govern the tools, but very few have figured out how to govern the decisions that those tools are shaping. That's where your difference really lies. And again, if you want to get your arms around that, there are principally three things that you need to be aware of, three gaps that you need to address in order to deal with it. And the first is the visibility gap. And it has two components to it. There's a dimension of breadth because it's often difficult to see all the different touch points where AI is influencing decisions in the organization. Your treasury team may be using machine learning for cash flow prediction. Your pricing team may be using it for discount recommendations. And again, granted, each of those teams understands the systems and knows what's happening. But at the CFO's level, there's rarely a consolidated view across the enterprise of all the different touch points for AI. And that's even for just deployed AI, not to mention the embedded AI and the off-the-books AI. So again, you've got to get your arms around where is it happening and how is it happening. The second dimension of visibility is depth, because AI has the ability to influence at scale below the radar. Now, what I mean by that is think about the circumstance where an AI algorithm is nudging thousands of pricing transactions in one direction. The cumulative impact of that can be materially significant well before any single transaction is. Again, you've got to get your arms around that. The second gap that you need to be aware of is the accountability gap. Most organizations haven't identified where they need to have humans in the loop to control the processes that they're operating, where AI is influencing key decisions. And more importantly, most organizations haven't defined that criteria by which they need to make those decisions as well. It's a two-part situation that you've got to deal with. Think about it in your own organization. How does it happen? Is the criteria clear for when you accept a model and when you don't? Or does it vary month to month, quarter to quarter, based on one person's intuition or gut feel or some other subjective criteria that is kind of loosely defined? That's another area that you've got to get your arms around. And then the third is the audit gap. Because when an estimate misses, you have to be able to reconstruct what happened. What were the model inputs? What assumptions were made? What other things did the humans consider in arriving at the final recommendation? Without that, you can't improve the system. And you create more and more challenges, and AI becomes the black box instead of something that you can predictably count on and improve over time. Now, here is the critical observation. When looking at those three gaps, most organizations tend to respond with things that they're already very comfortable with. More policies, more layered approvals. But that doesn't get at the heart of the issue, because they're attempting to employ a human compliance mechanism for a systems monitoring issue, and it doesn't work. So if more policies, more layered approvals aren't the answer, what is? Well, first, you have to start with the recognition that this is a fundamentally different system. Think about the way that a traditional governance framework works. It starts with the presumption that human judgment is the point of origin. One person generates an estimate, another reviews it, another person approves it, and you've got controls at each step, they fire, and the process works as intended. Well, AI isn't changing that process. What it is doing is inserting itself upstream of that process, because the estimate that a person is now quote unquote generating has already been shaped by an AI algorithm with its own set of inputs and assumptions. It may appear that your controls are working because someone's still reviewing and someone's still approving, but the judgment that those controls were intended to test happened well before a human entered the room. So it's a fundamentally different environment, and that's not a governance failure. It's just a recognition that your traditional controls are focused on one part of the process. It's not focused on the new part of the process that's being shaped by AI. So what does aimed at the right part of the process truly look like? As you think about the controls that you're employing, you've got to have a whole system that reaches back to where AI recommendations are being generated and covers the full range. And there are 3 simple things that you can do in the short term that doesn't require Herculean effort. I'm talking about things within the controls discipline that you already have to address some of those gaps. And the first is mapped influence, understanding where AI is touching key decisions within your organization. Now, I'm not talking about mapping every use case across the entire company. I mean, that's not what we're intending. But for those decisions that matter, whether we're talking about discounts for pricing, or whether we're talking about revenue forecast and things like that, you do need to know where AI is connected, because you can't govern what you can't see. It's kind of the fundamental element. And the output isn't a technology inventory. The output is an AI decision heat map that gives you the indication of where and to what extent and what type of AI influence is happening on those decisions that ultimately drive your financials. So that's the first thing that you need. The second thing that you need is a decision framework, a standard for how you interrogate AI decisions when they arrive for human review. And I'm not talking about just generalized guidance, but I'm talking about being very specific of understanding the model inputs, the assumptions that those models rest on, any criteria that a human considered, and any other conditions that may be affecting the outcome. Being very specific, and also addressing those conditions that might change the output significantly. Think about where an AI model accuracy has dropped below a certain threshold X, then you do this. Or think about a market disruption that's occurred since the last refresh of your data cycle, then you do that. Being that specific is what turns the review from just a sign-off to an informed judgment. That's truly the difference in how that decision standard works. And then the third thing that you need is a documented rationale. And a documented rationale or decision process. And what we're really saying is that this is the thing that makes the first 2 things real and tangible, capturing that information of model assumptions and inputs and what else was considered and any other factors that led to the rationale for the final call, doing that at the point of the decision so that you don't have to reconstruct it later. Again, that's how the model improves, that's how the system gets better and the organization gets smarter over time. And it's important that you're doing the decision trail by design rather than by happenstance. So that's what you need to consider. And we're not talking about a burdensome framework or governance. We're talking about something light, layered, an extension of things that you're already doing in your organization. Again, you're just being more intentional and specific about applying it upstream to the process. Now, I know that's a pretty straightforward framework. And it's not that organizations get caught up on that piece specifically, but where people do get hung up from time to time is in believing that their organization is prepared to actually act and do something about it. And there are principally 3 objections that come up that leaders have in their mind when we talk about this type of concept of decision governance. And the first is, we're not that far along with AI yet. We're not ready. This doesn't apply to us. And I get that piece, but as I mentioned earlier, if you're using any of those traditional solutions with embedded AI, or if you have employees, then you're already there. The decision about AI use has already been made for you. It's happening inside your organization. The only question is, do you deal with it now or do you wait? And here's the thing about waiting. For every decision that takes place in your organization between now and when you're quote unquote ready, you're putting your organization at risk. I'm just reflecting back to the 35 million euro or 7% of global revenue. You don't want that to be you in the moment. The organizations that are doing this the right way don't wait until after they deploy to govern. They govern as they deploy. That's the fundamental difference. The second thing that we commonly hear in terms of why companies are not yet moving on this yet is that, hey, we don't have the bandwidth for it. We've got a whole lot of things swirling around in our organization, all the day-to-day stuff. We just don't have the time for it. That argument presumes that governance is optional. And I'm willing to bet that your board doesn't see it that way. And so the real question isn't, can we afford to prioritize this now? It's, can we afford to have the conversation with our board when we have it? The third thing that we commonly hear about this is that, well, this is going to add a lot of extra work and it's going to slow us down. And I genuinely am sympathetic to that argument, because it is true that governance done poorly will indeed slow you down and get you stuck. But governance done well is very different. Governance done well actually saves you time. It lowers your risk profile, but it saves you time because you don't have to reconstruct things after the fact and the fire drill that goes along with that. You avoid all of the issues that you have in trying to deal with decisions gone bad. Governance that is done well gives you better decisions with fewer surprises. That's the heart of it. So let me recap where we've been over the last bit of time, and we'll get set and have some questions. But think about where we started with the stories about organizations that had failures because they didn't control how decisions were being made in their organization when it came to AI. It doesn't matter if the AI was right or whether the AI was wrong. If you don't control that process, you're going to have challenges in the long run, and that's going to be particularly true as AI continues to accelerate its influence on just about everything. The risks have never been higher, and this is probably the lowest risk point that you're going to have, because AI is the snowball that keeps building momentum across the organization. Investors are taking notice, regulators are taking notice, your board is taking notice, and you're already there because AI is already running through your organizations. And if you want to get your arms around governing the decisions, not just governing the tools, but governing the decisions, then you need to address those three gaps that we talked about: the visibility gap, the accountability gap, the audit gap. But the good news is that those capabilities are well within your organization already. All you have to do is map where AI is influencing decisions in your organization. Putting it in place the decision framework for how you interrogate those decisions and documenting that process. It's a very straightforward way. So the other part of the good news is this: from where you are to where you need to be is not that far away. And I know, just having conversations over the course of the last couple of days, a lot of people have come into this conference feeling like they're behind on AI. And that may be true to some extent, but I think everybody's a little bit behind when it comes to AI. But just a few steps can put you ahead of everyone else, everyone in your industry, everyone that you compete with. That's the difference. And this is one of those things that you can jump into action on. So I mentioned at the very beginning that I wanted to put a resource in your hands to help. And so I do have a discussion guide that you can share with your teams. You can have some conversations internally, and you can understand where you might have exposure and where you need to prioritize. All you have to do is scan the QR code, give me some feedback on today's session, and you can download the guide as well and take it back with you and dive into it tomorrow or next week when you're back in the office. The second thing that I wanted to offer in terms of support is this. We monthly host conversations on AI decision governance, as well as operationalizing AI with small groups of executives. And so if you'd like to join one of those conversations for a peer level conversation about what's happening and what you're seeing, would love to have you join us. All you have to do is go to our website, rootidea.ai. There's a registration link for the next session. Sign up, would love to have you as a part of the conversation. Third thing, if you're starting on an AI initiative and you're trying to get some help with that, or you're scaling up initiative and you just want to bounce some things off of a resource, give us a call. Schedule some time for a discussion. Would love to talk it out with you. And a related point is, if you want to learn more about Root Idea and our capabilities and how we help organizations, we actually work in a wide swath of AI support, everything from technology deployment itself and all the things that go along with that, but AI strategy, policy and governance, change management, risk management, and skills building for organizations, everything that people need to be successful. But if you'd like to learn more specifically, schedule a call and let's talk it out, and you can get a better sense for how we might be able to support you in the future. It's always good to have that reference at hand in case you need it, than to have to scramble at the end.